A great deal of film history has been built around wherever it was physically easiest to place a camera at any given time. For instance, it has practically always been true that filming must be performed on the planet Earth, with few admitted exceptions. That limitation, however, has never seemed to prevent imaginings and depictions of life outside of Earth. In fact, quite to the contrary, people have had a long time obsession with other worlds, alien planets, fantastic lands of myth, and all variety of futurist predictions. These other worlds have danced across the silver screen, they've appeared beneath painters' brushes, and have been described thoroughly via the written word. So, how do we do that? What tools are used to escape our familiar terrestrial Earth? How have the limitations in understanding our world extended to the limitations of creating new ones? The world is fundamentally abstract. Nature is ascribed identity, but it doesn't explicitly carry it. Human intervention, infrastructure, is oftentimes the basis of familiarity. The untouched landscape of the world is wrought with uncertainty. Therefore, rather than discussing the infinite modes of the unfamiliar, it's actually much simpler to first create a framework of familiar nature, and color is a reasonable place to start. In a general sort of sense, most unpopulated images of a natural earthy landscape will carry the three primary colors: red, green, and blue. Green tones often depict flora and life. Red hues capture stone, sand, and dirt. Meanwhile, blue captures the water and the sky. For this reason, green is very frequently omitted when depicting extraterrestrial planets. Through the lens of the human condition, green is the color of equilibrium. It represents nourishment and safety, life. However, environmentally, red tones tend to identify things that are abrasive, dry, jagged, and sparse. As our closest planetary neighbor, the red planet, Mars, is frequently cited as a template for an alien world. It exists firmly within the reach of satellite photography, and rovers have documented its barren, dusty surface thoroughly. And serendipitously, the American film industry happens to have been established near the largest desert in North America. The Nevada desert is a natural place to erect a film set. It's unoccluded by trees and buildings. It's free of most unwanted sounds and cheap by virtue of being out of the way. It has also been the obsession of several famous landscape photographers such as Michael Heiser, James Turrell, and Charles Ross. Furthermore, it's important to acknowledge the historical component of the American West, which has grown into a genre in and of itself. In Westerns, the principle of freedom, honor, and survival is used to formulate and justify a hero that feels called to the open, untamed, red frontier. And by fighting off hostile natives and living within the chaotic freedom afforded by a moderately dangerous environment, the Western genre provided audiences a facet through which they could familiarize and place themselves in a romanticized fantasy version of an open, dusty landscape, where adventure matches discomfort in equal volume. But at face value, deserts elaborate on the base instincts and fears associated with the color red. It is only the promise of establishment, law and order, and security that make it feel presentable as an ideal and romantic location. Photography of the Martian surface has further enhanced the public perception that red desert landscapes can be quite alien, and therefore fit easily into the realm of science fiction. This is likely why the hybridized genre of the sci-fi western has proven so very successful to modern audiences. A Mars-like planet can become the frontier of the future. The premise that a landscape is uninhabitable is used often when imagining alien worlds. There is a common underlying theme in historical landscape art of domination or ownership. Land is often painted in a way that showcases its ample resources and promising future, such as in Thomas Cole's famous painting, The Oxbow, where the world seems to literally accommodate civilization in the embrace of a picturesque river. The land within the river is an opportunity seized. It is claimed by humanity, carved out and populated. When land is photographed historically, it is often for documentary purposes, so that it can be examined remotely and cross-examined for its best possible use, be it practical or cultural. Landscapes full of lush green vegetation are immediately recognized as useful, paradise, Eden. Fantasy worlds will often use these sprawling fields of green and dense forests. These environments are meant to reimagine historical ones, emulating the saturated colors of the painter's brush. They are romanticisms of a familiar world rather than a new one entirely. And just like historical landscape paintings, they show a world that can be dominated, ruled by a king and physically fought over for claim. Oftentimes, fantasy lands are not alien. Their environments are not unknown. They feel familiar. But when it's necessary, the fear of the unknown can be a powerful tool in formulating a fictional environment. Extreme climactic conditions, cracked earth, scorching barren deserts, frigid tundras, and hostile jungles are often the premise for dark, treacherous regions in fantasy. Alien planets are covered in uniform climates surprisingly often. Why give Hoth a temperate region or Mustafar a lush forest? A land without people is a land where people cannot comfortably live. Alien equals dangerous. But is there a way to create the unknown without also creating danger or discomfort? Yes, actually, there are many. But personally, my favorite method of forming a gray area of understanding is through scale. When it's impossible to ascertain scale, it becomes impossible to accurately assess the environment. There is a form of terror in the enigma of scale. When we are alienated from our ability to contemplate size, it becomes impossible to place ourselves within a given landscape. But it's an abstract terror, one that is matched by curiosity. The simple inclusion of a horizon line can create an anchor for the eye within an otherwise sparse landscape. When the horizon line is lost via a dense fog or unusual perspective, scale can become impossible to ascertain. The impulse to fit within a landscape is an impulse to understand it as terrestrial. When we are made to feel small or big, we are forced to consider the world beyond our bodies, a world that literally doesn't have a place for us, and therefore we don't understand it. It's shockingly simple, yet deeply effective. But what if you want to create a world where familiarity and danger intersect? Well, one of the simplest ways to accomplish that is by creating a post-apocalyptic world where familiarity and danger exist in equal measure. Oftentimes, the world of a post-apocalypse will present as dangerous, but also lend a kind of catharsis to the viewer. The concept of nature overtaking the stringent and infrastructure-addled Earth serves as a kind of release to an audience that is currently living on that Earth. Order is safe, but it's also stressful. At times, it can feel suffocating. So the image of an abandoned city reminds us of the peace and serenity of silence. In this way, many apocalypse narratives are not framed as the end of humanity necessarily, but instead as the death and decay of the familiar. This concept can be felt in the lush, overgrown buildings and billboards of I Am Legend. The echoes of a familiar past lend the viewer an anchor in this new world, but it is a world in which the illusion of safety is shattered by decomposition. The scraps of familiarity are made to do battle with the uncanny horror of being overtaken by nature. In some cases, it's the residue of the familiar that incites danger. In films and television, the survivors of the apocalypse often squabble and fight over resources. The danger lies mostly in the process of acquiring and defending familiar objects or shelter, canned food, medical supplies, or weapons. It is the remembrance or loyalty to concepts of the old world that lead to future conflicts over resources and ideas. If the characters don't remember life before the apocalypse, this complex dichotomy collapses entirely, and the landscape serves once again as a kind of frontier. Examples of this are Adventure Time, Fallout, or even Mad Max, worlds in which the audience is able to identify as once being this one, but the characters within the fictional reality have no memory of this one, and are therefore able to operate freely, almost detached from history, in this new world. The force that's really being manipulated in apocalypse narratives is time. Not unlike color, time can be a key ingredient for depictions of non-real landscapes, and rather than using specific units of measurement, time in the context of an imagined world can usually be sufficiently described in general terms like before, after, long ago, or in the distant future. In early science fiction, extraterrestrial landscapes are often depicted as primordial, more primitive than Earth. The misalignment of perceived time becomes another facet of estrangement. It takes time to create order, so a young world is a dangerous one, but it also takes time for order to fall apart. The planet Earth perceives time uniquely in its ecological and geographic transformations. The sun and moon are non-terrestrial forces that regulate things like the color of the sky and the flow of the seasons, and this allows for a very measurable structure for time. The human lifetime is subdivided by these segments: days, months, years. Its overall length makes it difficult to recognize abrupt changes. Only so much can happen in an individual's perceived lifetime, and of course that individual perceives it on a moment-to-moment basis. So objects and planets that seem to operate on a different timescale elicit this strange sense of ambiguity. Even just altering the day-night cycle can dramatically offset a viewer's understanding of a given environment. In one episode of Futurama, the human characters perceive time differently than a race of rapidly evolving robotic organisms. The Planet Express crew fall asleep to a land of robotic dinosaurs and awaken to what they perceive to be contemporary civilization. Their understanding of time and progress is challenged by organisms that do not follow the same rules. The enigmatic monolith from 2001: A Space Odyssey is an object that doesn't obviously decay. It manipulates time by incentivizing the future, and it's capable of accelerating the time of the characters in the film. The premise is not at all unlike the timescale of planets, mountains, and rivers. It takes a mountain millions of years to form, and hundreds of millions to decay. We encounter non-human timescales all the time, but we rationalize them, we identify them. By giving the monolith its unusual structure, its perfect edges, its ageless, polished surface, it becomes ominous and terrifying compared to the craggled, chipping rocks of a mountain. In Planet of the Apes, it is once again time that estranges the protagonist from the landscape. The landscape itself is very much that of planet Earth. There is nothing structurally unfamiliar about it, aside from the lack of human infrastructure. It certainly feels closer to primordial than contemporary. Even the inhabitants of the landscape are familiar. The flora and fauna are unchanged, the only difference being the intelligent apes and animal-like humans. The discontinuity between the protagonist and his surroundings is time. The tiny subdivisions that create human continuity are revoked from him, and he is forcefully launched into a distant future in which human infrastructure has all but vanished, and the world has become a new frontier for apes. One aspect of the terror found in the final shot of the film is the revelation that the shape of the Earth itself has changed so dramatically in the enormous stretch of time that a familiar monument, known to sit in the middle of an island off the coast of a major city, is encapsulated in a massive, immovable structure of stone and sand. It is the last whisper of the familiar, on its way to being completely buried within a world that has grown hostile to intelligent human beings. The science fiction genre is certainly the home of desolate, enigmatic alien landscapes, but it's something of a double-edged sword because within it are also futuristic depictions of a familiar world beyond the present. A futurist metropolis can exist as a vast frontier to a contemporary viewer because oftentimes the strands of information that exist within the present have spiraled and rewoven over time into something that is perceived as a sort of frontier of complexity. One of the earliest forays into this subgenre is Fritz Lang's Metropolis. In it, we see expressionist design used to convey a city that is so large that its science and logic are estranged from emotion and empathy. Contemporary information is used to project an estimate of future problems, solutions, and ramifications. This is what delineates a futurist landscape from an apocalypse one. In an apocalypse, the land has been liberated from the woes of civilization. In a futurist dystopia, the landscape is fundamentally injected with them. It is a diagnosis as opposed to a disruption. In the film Blade Runner, the futuristic cyberpunk Los Angeles is a dense, churning pit of human activity. Cultural assimilation and population growth have led this timeline to a state of devastating hyperdevelopment, where buildings are so massive that they lose their scale entirely. There is still familiar imagery here, recognizable brand logos that flash on massive screens that hug every street of this rainy, smog-soaked city. In Blade Runner, the world hasn't ended, nor has it improved. It has continued on its trajectory until its history and technology have become so far from our own that the behemoth of a city becomes an ominous mass of noise, bursting with complexity and information, instead of a monument becoming buried by the churning tectonic activity of the natural landscape. It is the natural landscape that has been buried beneath the tornado of human development. Light pollution obscures the day from night, and the population is so overstimulated they hardly seem to notice the rain. The main virtue that modern means of storytelling possess that books, painting, and photography do not is sound. Sound in filmmaking is often placed into two categories: diegetic and non-diegetic sounds. Diegetic sounds are relevant to what's happening within a given scene. They exist in the reality of the characters, so examples would be footsteps, the clinking of utensils, or a car engine starting. Non-diegetic sounds are sounds that the on-screen characters likely cannot hear. They exist only in the audience's reality. The most common examples of non-diegetic sounds would be a musical score or something like a narration. It's easy to understand the way in which both can be used to assist in creating a distinct and unique environment. Diegetic sounds can be used to indicate texture, for instance, the crunching of snow or the ruffling of dry grass. If an unexpected sound is used, it raises a question about the nature of the environment the characters find themselves in. If the audience sees a grassy field but hears the sounds of glass breaking whenever a step is taken, then the diegetic sound becomes extremely relevant to their understanding of what's happening. Non-diegetic sounds, on the other hand, are frequently used to either reinforce or aggressively disrupt an expected mood. When music is played that is misaligned with the visual tone of the scene, it offsets that tone. Identical footage can imply very different ideas depending on the musical score paired with it. That's why it's surprisingly easy to make Mary Poppins seem like a horror film. However, of course, you can reinforce a happy moment with happy music, and the net result is, well, more happiness. Music is a huge facet of control that media can use over its audience. Music is so powerful in creating landscapes because auditory cues inform someone on how they should feel about what it is that they're seeing. Foley is the art of using props and other tools to create sounds that feel accurate to on-screen visuals. This sometimes involves using the literal object to create the sound in question, but oftentimes a more expected sound can be achieved with a different object. Diegetic sounds recorded through Foley often create this sense of more real than real. Noises come from the anticipation of the viewer, and the sounds themselves are exactly what instinct would imply. In a modern feature film, the audience is not likely to be distracted by an irrelevant, erroneously loud, honking car, or the incessant jingling of keys in a character's pocket. Sounds are precisely attuned, mixed, mastered, and balanced until the intended sensation of the environment is achieved. Uncanny settings either have too little or too many sounds on purpose. The vacant cities of the post-apocalypse are crushingly quiet. Meanwhile, the cyberpunk dystopias of the future are an auditory cacophony of noise. A landscape that can be seen and heard is one that is nearly touched. So, the creation of a fictional landscape involves understanding the fundamental illusions present in the natural world. Perception is dictated by changes in light, sound, color, time, familiarity, and scale. By identifying those relationships in nature, filmmakers are able to attenuate and control the precise nature of the alien landscape they are depicting. The exercise of realizing an imagined world is less a process of creating a realistic framework for what such a world may be, and more so an exercise of understanding the parameters of human perception and finding the optimal balance between familiar and unfamiliar, fear and curiosity, terrestrial and extra. The landscapes of fiction are permutations and deconstructions of reality. All fictional worlds must orient themselves within the human mind. So the next time you become fascinated by a story's unique setting, or you set up to make one yourself, remember, the toolkit for creating the unknown is everything that is already known. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned.